Do have a quorum of the Plan Commission, so I will call this special meeting of May 13th of the Plan Commission to order. First, we will hear from Jesse Poole, our technical facilitator.
All right, welcome to our virtual Plan Commission meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking on your link or the number in your original email. To members and city staff, members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you're speaking. The chair, clerk, and technical facilitator are responsible for muting and unmuting committee members. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. During any roll call, all panelists will be unmuted briefly. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which their hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. To members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the board, please send it to the email list in today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jesse. First, I want to welcome members of the Transportation Policy and Planning Board and Transportation Commission. I'm happy to have you here with us to hear what we hear and to participate. So thank you very much for being here. First, we will hear some information from our Department of Transportation and folks they have been working with. So we'll see some slides and hear about some transportation demand management program concepts and some information regarding possible interim measures on on-street parking. Following that, there will be time for questions, discussion, input ideas from the Plan Commission in regard to transportation demand management. As members of the Plan Commission know, we routinely have development proposals that come up that we do ask for transportation demand management measures. So this will allow a more consistent approach to the transportation demand management. So I don't believe we have any members of the public registered to speak. Is that correct, Heather? Yes. Okay, so no members of the public scheduled to speak. Are there any disclosures or recusals? Seeing no raised hands, no disclosures or recusals. Okay, we will move directly then to our special item of business, initiatives linking land use and transportation. So I will turn the program over to our Director of the Department of Transportation, Tom Lynch.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to share a slideshow. Cherubi will probably be doing the middle of it. We've been working with State Smart Transportation Initiative and Cherubi quite a bit. They've helped us look at this and review other policies. And then at the end, we have a series of questions that are really targeted to both the board and the Plan Commission on ways that we can move forward. So I'm going to go ahead and start my slideshow from the beginning.
One thing that I should have mentioned, excuse me, Tom, we aim to end at 8. We've been successful in the 4 other special Plan Commission meetings, so we've got a lot to cover, but our goal is to be done by 8. So thank you. Go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
Yes. I expect that we will be done before 8, but perhaps not. We'll see. So here's a draft transportation demand management program, and I'll just provide a little bit of background. This slide is an interesting slide to me. I just want to make sure that my slides are advancing. So do you guys see a graph right now?
No, your shared screen is not coming through.
All right, so why don't I make sure.
Okay, now we can see the graph.
Yeah, perhaps I didn't. I'll start from the beginning. So you can see the title slide now?
Yes.
And, okay, so now you should see a graph. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, so we're good. We'll continue on. So if we look at the last 50 years, from 1970 to 2020, the population of America has increased about 60%. But if you look at the vehicle miles traveled in the United States, it's increased 190%. So you think about that, that's grown at 3 times the rate that our population has grown. This is a picture that we took in, I think, 2019. And this was a picture that was easy to take because it occurred frequently. This is East Washington Avenue. I could have taken the same picture on University Avenue or perhaps a Beltline in some place. And when you look at this, it represents congestion, but it also represents that we really don't have a way to expand. We can't add a lane on University. We can't add a lane on East Washington. When we look at climate emissions, Chris sent me this graph, and this graph shows the climate and carbon dioxide emissions by sector, and you can see that transportation took the top position in the year 2000, and it's continued at the top. So when we think about climate change, right, we can't really get serious about climate change unless we get serious about how we're addressing transportation and the things that we're subsidizing and not subsidizing. So that leads us to the transportation demand management. So what is transportation demand management? It's a package of policies and procedures, strategies designed to increase transportation system efficiency and shift travel patterns to reduce the number and length of single occupancy vehicle trips. So what does that practically mean? It means getting people out of their car and going to work, to the grocery store on using other modes, walking, bikes, and bus. So I've been a traffic engineer for almost 30 years now. And as I went to college and as I learned things, we would approach a development this way. A development would be proposed. We would ask for them to develop a traffic impact statement. They would say that this development is going to develop this many trips. And then what we would do is we would seek to change the network, right? So that we can have a network that can accommodate the trips of the development. So that in small cases means, maybe adding or extending a left turn lane or adding the signal. But you start doing this over and over again, it means adding lanes, right? And that's what we've done over, I'm going to say the last 50 years, is we've added lanes to accommodate the trips from development. Transportation demand management really looks at it from a different way. It basically says our network is basically what we have right now. Our roads are what they are. It's very difficult and very expensive to expand them. So can we reduce the trips associated with the new development so that the trips are in line or in proportion to the network that we have to serve it? So if we think about transportation demand management, it's all over in our city policies. In 2018, we had the comprehensive plan updated, and it's strategy 5 in the land use and transportation C, TDM strategies. It's in our Madison in Motion transportation plan. It's in our sustainability vision. Help require new development to incorporate features that help residents and workers get around without a car. And it's in our land use regulations. We have mentions of it in conditional use permitting, process plan, development districts, employment campus districts, mixed use center district, and big box retail. However, there's been challenges. We have it, within and throughout our city documents, but there really hasn't been a central focus or a central clearinghouse, you might say, or a centralized program. We've been requesting and requiring some form of TDM and transportation impact mitigation through the development review process for over 20 years. In fact, I remember as a consultant doing a traffic or a TDM plan for the St. Mary's campus, and I think that was 20 years ago. Its application has been uneven. Some developers don't have to do a TDM plan, and some developers do, right? Developers are really unsure of what TDM measures might be required because there's just really not a straightforward process. I think the Madison Yards is a good example where that developer wanted to try and do the right thing, but there was just varying opinions of what he should do and how much he should do. And then this also leads to, I'm going to say, struggles with the Plan Commission, council members, and even the Transportation Planning Board members, because you struggle to determine how many TDM measures are enough to warrant approval. And that leads to prolonged discussions. I remember the Madison Yards TDM plan. I think it might have taken up an hour of council time at 11 o'clock some Tuesday night, and that's, we should have a program and a process that respects policymakers' time, provides consistency to developers. Right now, we've had an environment of uncertainty for everyone, for policymakers and for developers. So, what would a TDM program do? I'll share this slide, and then is Cherubi back on? Jesse?
Not that I see.
Not that I see. Okay, I can do her slides. I can do her slides.
I can take over, Tom, if that's what you want.
Yeah, perhaps we could maybe tag team. Okay. We'll go back and forth. So right now, if you look at the graphic on the right, about 2/3 of Madison's work trips have to do with single occupancy vehicles on drive alone, right? And the other 1/3 has to do with transit, walking, working from home, and biking. Okay, but communities that have robust TDM programs are able to shift that SOV, single occupancy vehicle, or drive alone share so that it's under half. And so that's what we seek to do with the transportation demand management policies. Purpose and community benefits, there's several here. It mitigates vehicle miles traveled. It supports equitable transportation options, right? Not everyone can afford a car, right? They have to get along on a bus or bike or walk. And we provide all these benefits for car travel, but we're not necessarily equally distributing our subsidies and our investments on things that aren't car. It reduces congestion, travel delay, noise, and air emissions. It supports transit-oriented development and infill, which is basically a better use of resources, right? It's better to have 100 homes, on 2 acres than 100 homes on 25 acres. And it also addresses public safety impacts. Perhaps I'll give this one, and then Sonia, you can move on. This is Cherubi's slide, and she uses seeds, right? So it's all it's easy to remember, but it's actually it's good. What this program, what we'd like to do is we'd like it to be consistent. It provides uniform requirements across Madison, so that all developers are treated the same. It also provides choice. Basically, rather than having a staff member or a council member say, you should try this or you should try this, we don't know their development. We don't know the market they're trying. So this allows them to meet their TDM targets by choosing what they think is most effective for the development. It provides clarity and a transparent process. You get credit for things that you're already doing, like for instance, city requirements such as a bike rack. You get credit for that. We would like this to be convenient. So rather than it requiring multiple back and forth between staff and the developer, and or committees and the developer, we would like this just to be a straightforward process form. They submit it, it gets approved. And then also, through this program, it helps with communication, right? Rather than, I believe the second time around with Madison Yards, there was really a lot of uncertainty. Are they doing enough, and how much should they be doing? And I know that the developer, the second or third time through, was able to say, well, we've put this development through the proposed TDM process, and it seems to comply. And so that helps you as policymakers to know, is that developer doing enough? And it helps the developer to communicate to policymakers, saying, we're complying with what you want to do. We're in line with the goals you're trying to achieve. So you wanna?
Yeah.
Samia?
Yes. Most of these slides that we have here, we've added some from our past presentation with both Plan Commission and TPPB. So for the majority of the slides that talk about research that we did in the past, I'm going to move a little fast on those slides, but we can always go back to them when we're taking comments. So this is just a list of TDM programs that we reviewed, and this is a non-exhaustive list. We looked at a lot more programs, but these are the ones that really inspired us in the way we've designed the TDM program for Madison. And as Tom already rightly mentioned, that the main goal for this program, along with giving the city and developers and building managers a better process, we also want to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips. And a lot of these programs have already achieved that. For example, Cambridge has a long-standing program, as well as Arlington. Arlington has successfully achieved a 38% of VMT reduction from 2008 to 2014. Cambridge is another really good example that has reduced its single occupancy trips from 55% in 1990 to 39% in 2018. We've talked about San Francisco. We've also visited their tool, their online tool, which is a really interactive tool, and we can do that again at the end of this presentation. Denver, again, is they just released their new TDM ordinance in spring 2021, and it looks very similar to the Madison program and is also slightly inspired from the San Francisco program. We can move to the next. So in the Madison's proposed TDM process, there are going to be 4 major steps. Depending on what land use you're proposing for, the size, parking stalls, there are different applicabilities. You can qualify for one and then come out of the other, but there are 4 major steps. So step 1 would be determining applicability. Step 2 would be determining TDM requirements, like what number of points would you have to earn, and then creating and submitting a TDM plan. And like Tom mentioned, this was already something that existed in the ordinance and different parts of the zoning code, but here it's going to be a more advanced and a straightforward process where developers could choose from, we're hoping it could look like a drop-down menu, and they could choose from a list of already designed TDM measures. And then the 4th step would be implementation, reporting, and monitoring. So as I mentioned, there are 3 different factors that would determine TDM requirements, starting with land use. whether it's residential, whether it's non-residential, for example, employment, commercial, institutional. There are also specific uses that are exempt from the program. Then development size, what's the dwelling units, what's the square footage, and then the last would be proposed parking. So the number of parking stalls, and we're working with different ratios here. For example, number of stalls per 500 square feet of development, or total number of stalls per dwelling unit. So as I already explained, there's going to be residential, employment, commercial, and institutional. The way these land uses would work is slightly different from one to the other. For residential, we're proposing to base it on number of dwelling units. So if there's a multi-dwelling unit development which has more than 10 dwelling units, it would automatically enter the Tdm program. For employment, it's anything above 10,000 square feet of floor area. Again, for commercial, it's a little more nuanced than just residential and employment. We're trying to focus on commercial developments that are proposing either more than 10 parking spaces or are above 40,000 square feet of floor area and are proposing more than 1.5 times the parking minimums. So we're giving some exemption to small retail commercial developments, as its research tells us it improves walk scores, it reduces trips. So we want smaller retail food services to come in more often. So it's slightly easier, if for the lack of a better word, for them. And then institutional, we're including hotels, educational uses, which for educational users, we're limiting it to high schools and above. We're not concentrating on middle schools or elementary schools. And then other health facilities as well. So just to understand the process a little bit better, we have a few examples. So this is what the residential and employment table looks like. So as you see, as the columns progress, it's either dwelling units or increasing size. And as the rows progress, it's the higher the parking ratio, the more points what a developer or a building manager would have to earn. So the third step, which is creating the Tdm plan, and this is where the list of Tdm measures that we've already designed comes in. So there's an option to choose from 35 different Tdm measures, and all of these measures are divided into 6 categories. So starting with basic measures, and these basic measures, we're calling them basic measures because TE already required these 3 specific measures from any development, even in the past, without even when there was no talk about a traditional citywide Tdm program. So this is something that developments automatically have to do and would earn points for it. Then we have active transportation, high occupancy vehicle measures, information and communication, parking management, and land use and location points. So these are some things that the land use and location measures are some things that you would automatically either qualify for or could propose changes in the plan and then earn points for that. We also have a 7th category, which is it's more like an open-ended measure. So it's if someone's feeling a little more creative and wants to, for example, add a dog park. So that's something that would definitely reduce trips for a residential development, residents of a residential development. So it's going to be measures, more creative measures like those, and then they would have to present it, of course, to the city, and then the city gets to decide on how they want to deal with those measures. this is the broad list of all the TDM measures that we have. There are certain options within these measures. So there is scope of choosing from whether you want to, for example, for HOV measures, whether you want to sponsor transit passes for 100% of your employees, or if you want to cover the cost 100%, say 75%. So these are different options, and the points, the range changes. So each measure is worth points ranging from 1 to 10, and that's how the options work. Points also depend on efficacy in reducing vehicle travel. So these are all documented practices that we've looked at, and that's how the points are allocated. Yep, I think we can move to the next one, Tom. Then, as I said, we have a couple of, more than a couple, we have 4 hypothetical option projects for you. So we can come back to this, but these are very generic locations that we thought might cover different types of developments around Madison. And these are all hypothetical projects again. So the first one here is an office project on 100 block of East Main Street. The floor area for the hypothetical project is 110,000 square feet with proposed parking of 220 stalls. So the parking ratio, and like I said, it's the floor area, it's parking ratio, and that is what determines TDM target for employment use. So based on 1 stall per 500 square feet and 110,000 square feet, Tom, if you could go to the next one. It falls in column 4 and row 3. So this hypothetical development would require around 22 points. And then let's see how this hypothetical developer would achieve these points. So there are so many more options available. We just went with the ones that we thought would be easiest, and we also have a variety of options for different projects. So as you can see on the left, they would directly get the 3 base points that they have to do. It's pedestrian access, bike parking, matching city standards, and designate a TDM coordinator. This again, there was a question I remember in the past meeting. This could be a part-time position. This could be someone whose main job description is something else, but also is a point person, contact person for employees or residents for TDM related efforts. So again, for location efficiency, as we know, Main Street is extremely walkable. It has a walk score of more than 95, so it gets 5 points. There is again a range for this. It falls under all-day transit service. So then it again gets 3 points, which is the maximum for that. So that's 11 points out of 22 points that they've already achieved without doing much. Then we recommend something like offering transit passes to their employees since they're already on all-day transit service. This could be a feasible measure. Then there are marketing and information measure. There's a marketing and information measure that they can also do, which is just an employee orientation. When someone new joins, they would just inform the employee of all the transportation options that are available around the development. Then multimodal wayfinding signs just means where the bike path is, where the bus stop is. And then there's a parking cash out option for employees. Now this is slightly and we can come back to this afterwards. This is slightly different from charging employees for parking. This, just so that it's clear, this means if an employer is offering free parking or parking at a very subsidized rate, they can also offer their employees the option of giving up their parking space in exchange of some cash incentive or some kind of incentive. So that's the parking cash out program. ma'am, you're muted, I think.
There, okay. Yeah, I also would like to clarify, and this is something that the developers that we've met with have also brought up, is that some of these are capital costs. So they pay that at the beginning of the project, yet some of them are operational costs, which means it's an ongoing, it's kind of an ongoing commitment. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later in the slideshow, but I just want to differentiate that, and the ongoing costs are kind of shown in, I guess it's in orange. So the second hypothetical project is more on the peripheral. So we have one that's very central, very urban. This one's more peripheral. You want to handle this, Samia? I can do it also. Anyway.
Sure.
Okay, so here, this would be residential. About 20% of it's affordable. There'd be about 100 dwelling units, 150 stalls. So the parking would be 1.5 stalls per dwelling unit. So it's a medium-sized project, and you can see the point target's 25. And so here you can see where it falls on the chart, the number of dwelling units, the parking stalls per dwelling unit, and then so the hypothetical project, the TDM measures, they get the 3 base points for having a coordinator, having bike parking and pedestrian access, right? They also get 2 points for having a 20% affordable housing mix, okay? But they don't get the location advantage, right? Because this does not have very good walk score because it's in the periphery. So the idea here is that, right now they are, I'm just going to say they're investing monies in infrastructure for car parking, and we'd like them to invest some monies also for alternate modes. And so there's different ways for them to do that. They could have enhanced access to bike parking, get 2 points, or have a off-site bike pedestrian infrastructure. That might be, let's say, a path between 2 cul-de-sacs or something to that effect. The bike user facility, or those maintenance stations that you see as you go along the bike path. They could implement traffic calming measures. Oftentimes what happens is that, developments happen, and then traffic happens, and then we retroactively install traffic calming, and this they could contribute to those types of measures up front. They could have car share, that's a car or something to that effect. The marketing and information campaign, a multimodal wayfinding sign, and then price parking or unbundled parking. So to define that, what that basically means is that you separate the cost of the stall, the parking stall, from the cost of the apartment. So perhaps you might charge $1,500 a month for the apartment, but then the parking stall costs $200, right? And so what that does is that makes people think about, should I get a second car or should I not, right? Because so, everyone got the stimulus checks, right? So we could all go buy cars. But then if you think that it's going to cost me an extra $200 a month to park it, that helps put the true cost of owning that automobile into perspective. And so that can lead to, reduced trips and reduced cars. So that's one way on how it might occur on the periphery. How about I'll do this one, and then you could do the next one, because the mixed use is very complicated, and you'll do a better job than I will. This one is in my son's neighborhood, so I can do this. This one's on the 2100 block of Regent Street, a commercial. It's really a grocery store, 20,000 square feet. This feels, if you think about it, this feels a lot like the Trader Joe's that's on Monroe, right? So this is that kind of. They're proposing 65 parking spaces. Ratio of proposed parking spaces to parking minimums would be 1.3. It's a small development. The target would be 12. And so here you can see, it's under 40,000 square feet. They're at 1.3 times the parking minimum, so they'd have to do 12 mitigation points. They get the 3 base points for providing bike parking, pedestrian access, and a TDM coordinator. The location efficiency, they get 1 point for that. And then they're within a quarter mile of all-day transit service. So they have 7 points right there. So they have to come up with another 5. So what they can do is they can have no drive aisle crossing. I think we all get frustrated when pedestrians have to cross the main drive aisle for any type of store, right? Offer bike share memberships to employees, that's 2. Provide a real-time arrival screen for transit, that's 1. And then delivery measures, providing either non-motorized deliveries. You're starting to see that more in those cargo bites, or maybe a multi-stop delivery service. And so that's how a development on Regent Street might achieve its points. So the next one is a mixed use. And I want to preface the mixed use saying that initially, when you look at the mixed use, it looks like you have to do lots more points, right? Because you have to satisfy points for every use that you're doing. But then you start to calculate the measures and how the measures count multiple times. And so about an hour into the exercise, you see, this isn't actually any more burdensome. But when you first look at it, you go, holy smokes, there's a lot of points. And so Soumya, why don't you go ahead and explain this one?
So this is a hypothetical development on 2900 block of University. It's we're saying it's a mix of residential and commercial. So we're gonna check what the applicability for TDM points is for both residential as well as commercial. So for residential, this development is proposing 50 dwelling units. So it comes under the TDM program. For retail floor area, it has a retail floor area of 10,000 square feet. So our Tdm requirements start at 10,000 for commercial or retail, as well as they're also proposing parking stalls, 40 parking stalls for commercial. So they automatically enter the Tdm program. For residential, they're proposing 70 stalls. So based on these two different parking ratios, residential comes at 1.5 stalls per dwelling unit, and commercial comes at 1.6. Let's see what point requirements they fall under. So for residential, they would have to meet around 18 points, and for commercial, they would have to meet around 15 points. So, and as Tom mentioned, it sounds like a lot of points, and it sounds like we might be, penalizing them for having mixed use. But if you see here, a lot of the points, they're earning a lot of the points that are related to measures that are site-specific. They just have to invest once, and they're getting points under both uses. So they're getting base points under both uses. That's the 3 points that they get. For location efficiency, so this is slightly interesting, because for residential, we're saying that they fall under a good walk score, so they're getting 3 points for it. I think it might be 70 plus or 75 plus. But for commercial, we're not giving them the same points. But what we're doing is, and the reason behind that is, every time a commercial or retail development comes in, it doesn't always benefit from the walk score, but it adds to the walk score. So we're giving them points. We're giving them 5 points. We're adding 5 points to the walk score. Say it was 75. We're adding 5 points to it for every storefront that they're proposing. So based on that, they're getting 1 point automatically for their proposal under commercial. Then for mixed use, the residential gets 3 points because they're proposing a commercial. Commercial doesn't get any points for mixed use. Then they're both under all-day transit. They can both offer discounts for bike share. There's one located really close to it. So they're also getting points for being located close to a bike share station. So these are also points that they automatically get. So the only ongoing cost for this would be the bike share discounts that they offer to employees and to residents, as well as marketing and information option that we're saying might be good. And that's again just sharing pamphlets or letting residents, or in this case, employees know of existing transportation options around the site. Then again, the one capital cost that we're saying they would have to invest in, the one-time cost would be an off-site pedestrian infrastructure. So, and the same infrastructure would qualify residential as well as commercial to earn points because it's site specific again. And then multimodal wayfinding signage that again qualifies for both. So the only two different measures that they would have to do would be the bike share for employees and residents and marketing campaign for employees for commercial.
Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try and follow a link and see if this goes into Zoom. So can you all see, right now, do you see me being on San Francisco's website?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to say that this is maybe Jedi level TDM program efficiency, but this is a pretty nice interactive tool where you can say where your development is right there. And then I can specify the retail use. So let's say I put restaurant. Can you see, I'm going to put 15,000 square feet. Can you see me typing 15,000 square feet? Okay, you can. So that's good. And then I'm going to say the gross square is 1550, okay? And then I'm going to say that there's going to be 50 parking spaces, which I don't know where you could put 50 parking spaces anywhere in San Francisco, right? But, and then what they do is they just kind of, here it says, you can see to the right, it has 32 target points. And so then I can just start, I unbundle the parking, I get 4 points. I have a short-term daily parking position. I'm providing bike parking, and I'm using option A. I have no idea what option A is, but that's what I'm using. You know, I put showers, bike share memberships, car share parking, delivery supportive. I'm not doing on-site, contributions and incentives, wayfinding signage. So you can start to see that that they have a pretty active and easy website and then they PDF this and they submit it, and the website does its own. I don't think I'll ever get to 32 with 50 parking spaces, but for 25 parking spaces, I'm close already. So you can see how that works. And so, San Francisco is a different environment than us. But what they have done with this website is they've provided a consistent program so the developers know what they have to do. It's pretty interactive. And policymakers don't have to struggle with, is a development doing enough or not? It's just kind of, do they meet the program or do they not satisfy the program? So I'm going to stop sharing there, and then I'm going to go back to sharing my slideshow. So let's see if yeah, okay, so now we get to a point where we talk about parking, because transportation demand management and parking are linked. And Sabrina will probably talk about some of this. Sabrina, are you ready and available?
I am.
All right.
All right. Evening, everyone. So some of the incentives with the Tdm program basically encourages developers to reduce the amount of parking built, also unbundling the cost of parking and charging the users directly, which can be effective at encouraging mode shift and reducing SOE. But this can also have unintended consequences when there are other parking alternatives, and especially free on-street parking that's available. When off-street parking is limited or users have to pay for parking in the development, many of the residents or patrons will shift to the use of on-street parking to avoid having to change their mode of travel or paying for parking. So in areas where there's availability of free on-street parking and proposed developments, this can reduce the effectiveness of TDM measures. And additionally, residents, especially those who rely on the use of on-street parking themselves and don't have off-street parking alternatives, may oppose developments, both out of concern for the loss of parking availability and also negative traffic and parking impacts spilling into their neighborhood and increased traffic on their streets. Next slide, please. So, historically, the city's residential parking permit program has been really the primary tool in residential areas and on residential streets to mitigate development impacts and commuter impacts. For streets in non-residential areas, there are other measures that we typically use, such as time limit restrictions, pricing for on and off-street parking, metered parking, and other designated loading zones, etc. But specifically talking about impacts on residential neighborhoods, there are some potential improvements that we could make that could be done in the near term. This would reduce competition for on-street parking, both for areas where there would be new development and commuter and other non-residents coming into the area, as well as other pressures from residents in residential developments. So some of these options that could be implemented are limiting RP3 permits to spaces available. Currently, there are several areas that there are 1.5 or more permits sold per spaces available in that area. So those are oversold, often referred to as a hunting permit for a parking space, but certainly more permits sold than there are spaces available. Other measures could be this would require some ordinance change to address the commuter impact and petition requirements that we currently have. But there could be changes to more proactively implement residential or time limit or RPO restrictions in neighborhoods and not require that petition process, or to streamline that where we would anticipate there would be commuter impacts and increased parking pressures from a proposed development. There's also a possibility to change restrictions in some locations from what's RP3, this is the 1 hour and 2 hour time limit restriction, to resident permit parking only. That would essentially extend the hours of enforcement. So the restrictions are posted from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. But that allows people to park at 4 p.m. in the evening and stay till 10 a.m. So it's really only in effect from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. that those can be enforced. So creating a resident permit parking only would increase basically the enforcement effectiveness as well. With only having to go through one time, it's very clear who those people violating the restrictions would be, rather than having to return after 1 or 2 hours to see if that person's vehicle is still there, as is the case with the time limit, and also can be fully enforced from 8 a.m. until 6 p.m. So that could significantly address some of those locations where there's demand from residents or evening uses by extending that restriction a little bit longer and making it easier to enforce. There's also currently an exemption for temporary residents that their vehicle registration does not have to be registered to their address. So this allows primarily it's students who take advantage of that and are able to get a permit. But other sort of temporary visitors or longer term visitors of people who live in residential parking permit areas are also eligible under that exemption as well. So that would significantly reduce the number of permits sold and restrict eligibility by requiring the vehicle to be registered to the permit address.
So I want to just kind of augment that. I think I heard Sabrina say that there is a group within the Transportation Plan and Policy Board that is looking at I'm going to say a broader and more comprehensive parking reforms that would require or may require broad sweeping changes, some capital costs, perhaps some acquisition of software. And those efforts are needed, and they're needed. However, these are some small, more modest tweaks that probably could be done within our existing capital budgets and our existing staff levels that could address maybe concerns that residents or adjacent neighborhoods would have regarding the TDM program. So we would use these kind of as an interim before implementing something that's more broader sweeping. So we've interacted with the development community because they are the ones that would be submitting the TDM plans in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And here are some comments. One, they like the transparency and predictability of the program, rather than putting in measures that maybe a staff person might say. They get to see how they satisfy the points. They like the ability to choose. They do say it's necessary to make the differentiation between upfront costs, which are really capital, right, and then the ongoing costs, which are operational. The ongoing costs are harder because it means that they have to transfer that to the people that are leasing those buildings. The HOV category of points, which is operational, like bus passes is difficult. How do they make operational expense commitments on behalf of tenants and remain competitive? They also, so those are more, you might say, rhetorical questions. But then there were several questions that were just good questions that we have to figure out how we would address with this program. One, how would a multi-stage development work where parking is built in the first phase, right? Do we analyze the first phase or do we analyze the full development? And what if something changes? One asks, how much cost would this add to a project? And so as I think Samia said, that the point values are often related to the efficacy of the measure. And some measures are really expensive, like car sharing, having a zip card. You generally have to have 2, you have to buy the car. It could be an investment of $100,000. And so should we consider the cost as we assign the point values? So some developers said there's not enough credit given to urban core projects. And other developers said there's too much credit given to urban core projects. So we're probably exactly right for urban core projects. Right? Should affordable housing or income restricted units get more points? You saw in one of the examples that 20% was affordable housing and they got 2 points. Well, should that be more? Or what if it's not necessarily fit the qualification of affordable housing, but there's still more median income? Should there be points given to that? Should there be points for density? For example, 100 units on 3 acres is more resource efficient than 100 units on 25 acres, right? So there is some incentive for density right now, right? Because typically more dense developments, they have fewer parking stalls per unit, okay? And they're typically in a more walkable area, right? And they're typically by or near transit service. But should there be more points for that? You know, if we consider that versus 100 houses on a quarter acre somewhere out on the periphery. And then some developer says, could the city provide resources on how to implement measures? For example, transit boards. I actually, if I'm at a transfer point, I appreciate those little TV screens that tell me when the buses are coming and if a bus is running late. But how do you get one of those? Where do you put it? And what network do you hook it up to? How they just don't have that type of information. One says we need to have a robust enough program to change transportation habits, but not drive development out of Madison. So we want this to be effective, but development that occurs in a far-reaching peripheral community like Edgerton or something like that probably will add vehicle miles traveled, not decrease it, right? So how do we still make Madison attractive yet really tackle this transportation? Can mitigation points be made invalid from factors outside of their control, be grandfathered in? This is a strange one because it really almost, it would never apply, but for the next 2 years, it could apply. We've had basically our same bus network since I think 1998, right? So for 22 years, it has changed very modestly, but in the next year and a half, we'll probably change it dramatically, right? And so you could, in theory, be on a bus route now, and 2 years from now, you wouldn't be on. Right? And then the third one, tenants and banks have minimum parking standards. This program allows that, but requires increased mitigation. This appeared to be good because it makes it mainly a business decision. So rather than forcing developments to limit their parking, right, and push down the parking, the development can actually put the parking in that they need to get their financing or to market what they think they have to market. But if they're going to make that investment in cars and motor vehicles, then they have to satisfy more points and make a comparable investment in other modes. And so at least one person that we spoke with thought that was good, that rather than dictating something that will be hard for them to satisfy, it just makes it a business decision. So, I have specific questions for the commission and the board, but there's a graphic that's covering it, so I'm going to take out that graphic. Maybe I just first question is, should interim parking policy measures be considered with the implementation of TDM?
Tom, I'm going to first ask if any of the commissioners have any questions about the information that has been presented. So I'll look for raised hands if there are any questions of staff about any of the information that has been presented. Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes, I guess my question is, how did you come up with the threshold of small, like residential, being 10 to 25 dwelling units, and also employment 10 to 25,000 square feet, and mixed use of 10 to 40? Was that based on the experience of other cities, or your thoughts about the development that we've seen in Madison? Or I guess I'm just curious about that.
So I believe this is based on what other cities are doing, but then we are, one of our questions that we have are we hitting the right target? I'm also going to introduce someone that you're all very familiar with. Eric Sundquist is actually an expert in this, and he's been very helpful for us until he abandoned us about 3 weeks ago.
He's with us tonight.
Yeah, he is tonight. Now I'll let him talk. But so I believe that's based on other programs. But one of our questions that we have are we hitting the right size? Should we just be requiring this from the very large developments or very trip generating, or should we just say this is something that all sizes of development should participate in? Because it's easier if you have a smaller development, it's easier to do. But then does a 12-unit apartment building want to recertify every 2 years? Or that type of thing.
Yeah.
Eric, do you have anything to add, or Samya?
I would just add to that. Like Tom said, it was inspired from a lot of different cities, but we also looked at a lot of past projects that came to Plan Commission to understand sizes for different land uses. So it's also we did do spot checks and cross checking. So yes, that's all.
Okay.
Did you have any follow-up questions, Commissioner Cantrell?
No, I was just assuming that it was based on the experience of other cities and also looking at Madison's development, because Madison's development obviously is different than other communities, but obviously has the same impact on traffic and parking. But I think that answers my question.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Heck.
Thank you. Just a series of random questions. I'm curious as to why places of worship were exempted from the requirements, and is that just something that you've seen in other cities?
Oh, so I was involved in those discussions, right? So, so oftentimes, so I actually go to a rather large church, right? It has a big parking lot, and they need every single space, right? Staffing morning, right? They need it's all full. But then during the week, it's not as full. They have staff, and then many churches have also schools. That's becoming increasingly common where they either sponsor a school or they rent out a portion of that. And so the intent was for the base employment. So let's say the school, the school might have 20 staff members, and then the staff of the church maybe is another 20 or something. That we would target TDM measures for that base that occurs through the week. But then the one event, on Sunday morning, would be exempt because they need the parking spaces. And one might also say something similar for other types of venues.
Something to think about. Interesting. Another question, I saw that there were some minor points given for, I think, off-street delivery vehicle parking. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't seem to me to be very VMT reduction friendly, perhaps, if it's not a multiple destination delivery service, if it's kind of a more like Uber or Lyft or Eat Street or something. It certainly is. There may be reasons for that, but it doesn't seem very VMT reduction friendly.
So, do you have any background on that, or do you not? I suspect that came from a study, but I don't have the background on it.
I don't have the exact numbers to support that, but it's just something. And I know Charvi looked at different studies on how VMT reduction works with these measures, but a lot of the TDM programs around the country have this in their measures, and we did look at how it reduces it. I think it's SF, it's the San Francisco Tdm Plan that has a list of tentative VMT reduction, like percentage with every measure. So I think it was based on that, but I'll have to check back on that.
Okay, thanks. That might be worth looking into. Just a couple of other questions. Did staff or maybe even TPPB or Plan Commission discuss this? I can't remember, but did we discuss incentives for going beyond the total number of points that are required for your particular project? To somehow incentivize going above and beyond?
We haven't, but that's an interesting thought. Right now, it's a pass or a fail, right? Pass or fail grade. But let's say if someone produced 30 points and they were only required to provide 25 points. I'm just thinking out loud, what types of incentives would be useful to them? Do you have something in mind? I mean, that's an interesting concept, but I'm trying to.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, you could talk about density bonuses or exceptions. As a plan commissioner, I'm thinking about things related to zoning, perhaps, or it may be there's some way to work in the affordable housing component of it, or funding of some sort. I don't know. I don't have anything in mind, but something to think about.
That's actually I think Matt Tucker is here too, and so that's something that we could investigate with Matt. Matt, you have your hand up. Do you want to answer that, or do you have a question too?
Matt, I've unmuted you. Matt, go ahead.
You guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So incentivizing is really tricky because, typically when we talk about incentivizing, I'm gonna, you probably heard this speech before come from me or John Strange or Heather or something, but like when you allow a density bonus or you allow stories or something like that, you need to assure that whatever you're giving away is sort of like always maintained into the future, because you're not going to be able to go back and take a story off the building if the program changes. So, there are some of these measures that can be permanent, that are built-ins, like shower rooms and maybe traffic calming measures or things like that might be permanent. But there's other things that will change, like signage and right now there's bike share, but maybe someday there'll be hoverboards and things like that. And so it'd be really, we have to be kind of really thoughtful of the types of things that we could incentivize that won't go away as a result of this. Maybe something like a reduction in the fee could be something we could incentivize. That's something that we could deal with, because that's a one-time thing that gets recertified every 2 years. And we use that recertification to check for enforcement or check for compliance, and sort of like flush out the reruns for the property through the TDM program. And so fee reduction might be an option. But I think things like density bonuses and tangible things need to be specifically tied to things that can't disappear.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, just another couple of more questions. I didn't notice a bonus for shared parking, shared use parking. Maybe it was there, but I didn't notice it in the examples. When let's say a residential use and a commercial use share the same parking space. I wasn't sure.
So that's a good question, and I'm going to write it down. And planning staff had a similar thought about that. So shared parking is a more use of resources, right? Instead of, we're building one parking space that can be used by two things instead of one thing, right? And so more of it, but shared parking isn't necessarily a trip reducing mechanism. You see what I'm saying? So it's like in my mind, I say, yeah, let's give credit to that, but because we want to incentivize that, right? But it doesn't really reduce the trips. And so maybe other people that were in the group said, it's not reducing trips, it shouldn't be in the program. So, yeah.
It looks like Matt Tucker might have input on that also.
So we have, we have lofty goals in the zoning code about allowing shared parking where it would be, parking on separate properties, not like a mixed-use building where they share the same parking stall and games and like that. I think that's what you're talking about, Alderheck, is off-site kind of sharing. And that's written in the code. There's a couple of pages of really nice language about that. We have a grand total of one property that's taking advantage of that because the way it's written, it really encumbers the property to permanently dedicate the shared parking to the use of another property through a recorded instrument. And that is just something that doesn't work very well. And, I think this kind of talks to that question about parking and our policy on parking and our regulations. Maybe we need to be a little lighter with that and not be so restrictive in that it, ties up a property in perpetuity because that's why it hasn't worked. That's why people haven't taken advantage of it.
There are also, though, large developments with parking structures that utilize some of their parking in that manner. So it's not off-site all of the time, but
yeah, those places, there are places that are actually pivoting their parking structures daytime for their on-site users or whatever, and they run a parking utility or a parking ramp. And you'll see those come through. Those uses are, I believe they're conditional uses where they're allowed, so they come through the plan commission. We're seeing a lot more of those, and those are great. That's something I know we've talked about with the group. We talked about how does a parking ramp fit in? But what makes it really complicated is how does a parking ramp fit in? It's not a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, 365-day a year, whatever parking ramp. It's a parking structure from 8 to 4, and then for the on-site offices or whatever, and then it becomes a public parking ramp at night. And that's something that I think we're still sort of grappling with and how those work because those function differently on different traffic impacts.
Okay, thanks. Maybe Soumya, did you have something to add to that? Sorry to take over the meeting.
I think Matt and Tom covered mostly everything that I was gonna also comment on, but we do have two measures that in the list that work with if developers are in a contract with an adjacent parking lot or a city or a ramp that is administered by the city. So there are options of that as well. For shared use, like Matt also mentioned, we did have conversations around giving points only if they're below the recommended shared parking number. So the same as how we're working with parking minimum. So you have to go a little above and beyond the recommended shared use. So that's where we're at. But like Tom said, we're open to comments and better suggestions on those.
Okay,
Thank
thanks.
you, Soumya. Did you have any further questions, Alderheck?
One more question for Sabrina. Sorry. I thinking about reducing the ratio of permits to spaces as was one of the suggestions. And I'm wondering if there's data that shows actually not just the ratio, but some estimate of how many of the spaces are unused during the day. I'm thinking particularly of the student districts that I'm kind of worried about. And if we were to do such a thing, and I'm thinking maybe they're, even though they have a high number of permits issued per space, perhaps the spaces are actually empty sometimes. Maybe that's a pipe dream, but I wondered if you had any data on that.
Sure, we don't have regular data that we're able to collect. They're somewhat cumbersome. They're manual counts and somebody actually going out and counting spaces and counting cars and putting that together. So unfortunately, we don't have, regular data collection that we can provide on that. We can certainly do it sort of on a, location by location, taking a snapshot via studies on that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm thinking of the student districts and worrying that that suggestion about making sure their car is registered at their address seems kind of inequitable to students. And then I'd have to think more, I guess, about the suggestion to only sell the appropriate number of permits given the number of stalls or something. But
anecdotally, since I observe one of those parking areas every day, we sometimes take bets on how many seconds a particular spot will remain open before it fills again. So in at least some of these areas, they are perpetually full, except for at Thanksgiving and Christmas. Even in the summer, they tend to remain pretty full.
One thing to note on that is that, the University of Wisconsin probably has one of the best TDM programs in the nation. You can really be a student at UW and not have a car. Yet, having a car provides freedom, right? You can do this and that. But, I think was it Michigan? I can't remember if it's Michigan State that does this or Ann Arbor. They implement this where they only give permits to cars that are registered at the address.
Yeah, I guess working on a building on campus where a lot of employees, are constantly playing the parking game, so they don't have to pay for parking, impacts all of these areas too. That's sort of separate from RP3 to a certain extent, but it's the 2-hour move your car game for a lot of UW employees too. Those are all my questions. I'll be quiet for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. I wanted to confirm, so, perhaps it happens at recertification, or I'm wondering if you can do it in between, if you can swap points, if someone were to take points for the shared car service, for example, and then, whatever organization they're working with kind of raises fees a lot and it kind of becomes prohibitive. Can they at any time kind of swap for an even amount of points or more?
Yeah, that's the intent. We think that we would have some type of biennial certification, and if they find that something's either becoming too expensive or maybe it's just not working, they're on bus passes and no one's taking them, they could try something else, because I want to say this is more than just a developer trying to satisfy the point requirement. They're providing a service to the people that they're trying to attract to their development, right? And so rather than looking at this as a requirement, which it is a requirement, but they could also be looking at this as an amenity that they use to rent their apartments or rent their space. And so that could be changed every couple of years.
Okay. I guess this is also maybe more of a comment, but one of the items was traffic calming and including improvements such as speed bumps. And I would just, as this is developed, maybe include some typical costs for those improvements, particularly for someone that's developing something fairly small or, doesn't have a lot of experience with that. I think that, some of those things can cost a lot more, create a lot more coordination than you may be anticipating. So I think it would be helpful to give some examples in the materials.
Yeah, that's cost was a factor that was referenced by the developer. So that's a good comment.
Yeah, sometimes it just triggers, a lot of related improvements in the right of way that you may not be thinking of. And then in terms of affordability, I I think this was discussed the last time we talked about this, and I see it in here that it's for 60% county median income and below. And I'm just curious if that's been discussed more with community development staff. You know, there are more programs emerging to kind of reach folks in the missing middle per se, 80% AMI. And if there were more funding programs and initiatives for that, it might be something that could be tied into this in terms of having some points for those income, for, providing housing for those income levels as well.
That's a very good comment. And one other developer also mentioned that we should look into that more, because it's something that we do want to incentivize. And not do we want to incentivize a bit, I guess it's been shown that affordable housing has fewer trips. So it's not like we're changing the system. It's just
Okay, and then my last question, I think it was Matt mentioned in related to a separate item about, something being recorded on a property and folks not always liking that. Am I understanding it correctly that this TDM plan or like a notice of it would be recorded on the property? And would that be in perpetuity? Would there be like a timeline associated where that would expire? How does that work?
Yeah. So our draft ordinance, this is actually a thought of John Strange, and I thought it was actually I thought it was creative. So rather than put a TDM requirement that's on the property that could change really every other year, right? We're gonna do this or that, and every time it changes, it has to be revised. He suggested that they just put a notice there so that anyone that purchases that property knows that they'll have a requirement to submit a Tdm plan. And I think this is kind of a struggle that we've had, is because some developers develop a property and they keep it and they rent it and all that, but a lot of developers just want to develop the property, provide an investment in the community, and then move out. And so that developer can make all these commitments, but then how do we get to the next person that owns it to make satisfy those commitments? And so that was just a mechanism that John Strange came up with. I thought it was interesting. So
okay, yeah, great. That answers my questions. Thanks so much.
Alder Lemmer.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could talk more about the approach to residential properties on the periphery, where there's not going to be a walkability score and transit access isn't great, but also have the bike amenities are nice, but they're not going to be all that helpful for most folks who are needing to drive from work or daycare and everywhere else. So I guess how did you approach that, and I guess what are the other options in there that I didn't see for managing that?
So a lot of those properties are actually exempt residential developments that are, and so I'm going to say many suburbs on the periphery are exempt. I actually have a question in my own notes saying that, should they be exempt? Because, you have to have a car, right? In some of those developments, because there is no bus service. So should we, rather than exempting them, should we find something that's appropriate for them? And so that, I feel like at our next team meeting, I was going to ask that question. Samia, you probably know more about the project details. Could you specify what the exemption is for, let's say, a peripheral residential?
I'm not sure, Tom, what you mean by exemption, but we do have a lot of different options. Like, for example, peripheral development could provide van pool services for their residents, as well as if there's an office space, the office development that's locating outside. They could also partner with adjacent developments if they already have an existing van pool service. This is again the program sort of incentivizes in itself developers to locate closer to transit service. That's the whole, we did sort of juggle with that question that if there isn't transit service, how do they get points for transit service or for HOV measures? But then we debated a lot, and we wanted to find a sweet spot where we weren't, putting them in a tough position, but then also incentivizing future developers to locate closer to transit hubs as well as in good walk score neighborhoods. Also, they have the option of providing smaller commercial developments. And like I said, each storefront that they're proposing would add 5 points to their existing walk score. So they would get a substantial, say if it's a walk score of 30 and they add 3 storefronts, they would get 2 to 3 points for that proposal. Affordable housing again. So there are different ways in which they can definitely meet the point targets. And we looked at, I think, some 10, 15 developments that are proposed in the periphery, like developments that came to Plan Commission in the past 2 to 3 years. And we were able to hypothetically assign them TDM measures without them having to completely rely on transit. So, but yeah, that's still a question that we might get from the development community, or yeah, that's something we're still, I think, struggling with.
When I think of your district, and I think of the Sprecher Road, area, for example, there isn't a lot of bus service there, right? So right here, the exemption is for less than 10 dwelling units, but you're saying, well, let's say there is a 30 unit subdivision. Let's say a 30 unit subdivision. How do they get points? Now they can get a lot of points through infrastructure, right? An example, paths that go through developments, since they have full control of the site, they have a lot of control over the infrastructure that's in place. But do they have enough control on enough point opportunities is what I think what you're asking. And so the question, we should maybe pick the Sprecher Road development and just say, what would be required for something like that? And how would they accomplish it? So that's a good question.
Thanks, Alder. Did you have any follow-up questions, Alder Lemmer?
That's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Cantrell.
How would a live-work unit be treated? And because we've been seeing some apartment buildings have live-work on the first floor, is that treated as both a residential and potential commercial or office?
I don't know.
Tom?
I don't know. Does Matt or Samia have an answer for that one?
Okay. So we looked at a lot of projects, like I said, and I think we just came across one, maybe, or 2 developments that are like that in Madison. But the plan is to consider them as a mixed-use development, and they would be getting points for a land use mix. And if they have 50% or say 40, 60%, they would be getting a good amount of points for that mix. And they would also be sharing parking between the 2. So they are going to benefit in terms of how points are being calculated.
Okay.
Matt, did you have anything to add?
Just going to say yes. Yes, commercial space.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Anything else, Commissioner Cantrell?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Alder Foster.
Thanks. On one of the points that I think I saw was paying for cab or rideshare to BRT. I'm assuming you didn't make that up on your own and saw that from some other cities. I was a little surprised at that one. I don't know if you have any info on it or any, I guess in particular, any research that actually says that would lower VMT. Everything I've seen related to rideshare says it actually increases VMT. And I can get how it would perhaps allow somebody to not own a car, but seems like it's just as likely to actually increase the number of trips and have people that could walk or ride their bike or take a different bus to the BRT instead getting free cab rides to the BRT. Any info on that one?
Tom?
Yeah, actually, we can look into. Truby's here. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Welcome. So right now it's like 4 a.m. in India, where Truby is right now. So she's had a long day or a long morning. Did you hear that last question, Truby?
I did. I'm really sorry for not joining earlier. So to address that question, there are some cities which actually do have this measure, and they help reduce the length of the SOV trips, if not the number, because this measure would actually be targeted more towards the regional trips. So for people who are accessing Madison from outside, they can really access the stations at the outermost regions of Madison and then enter maybe the internal parts of the city. So in terms of VMT reduction, it would help by reducing the length of SOV trips.
That's one we can dig into a little bit.
It's more like a last mile measure, first or last mile measure.
Yeah, except rideshare, you have to double it too because they're driving out to pick the person up and then driving them where they need to go. So yeah, I guess I'm a little suspicious on that one, but maybe that's a small detail to look into. Thanks.
Did you have any further questions, Alder Foster? No. Okay. I have one question in regard to the interim measures that you have listed, Tom, and others of your staff. What of those interim measures do you think would, or do you know would be helpful in addressing the vehicle miles traveled issue? Because if people are driving to work and not using the TDM things, but instead they're parking on city streets, we would not have decreased really vehicle miles traveled if all they're doing is shifting where they're parking onto city streets. So what interim measures do you see as addressing the concern, the problem with people simply parking on the street instead of in parking ramps provided by the employer?
Maybe I'll take the 10,000 foot view, and then Sabrina will take the 1,000 foot view, right? In my mind, I think we just want the cost of owning a car and driving to be appropriately represented, right? And when you get free parking, the cost, the societal cost of owning that car and the space it's taking isn't really correctly represented. So, free parking adjacent to a development, you know, they technically are not eligible for that parking, but they may use it if enforcement is not good. We would like them to park in the development, right? Because that means that they will have to pay $200 a month, which means that they may think twice about getting a second car, or if you know what I mean. And then we also, I want to say, I'll just say what I think. That's what density in many ways is good, right? Because density typically occurs along transit routes and it's easy to serve. Density is good because it consumes less resources. It's easier to serve with utilities. But the parking, oftentimes we don't get density because of neighborhood opposition, right? Because they want the density over there and not next to us. So how can we make a good development that probably is more sustainable than something would be out in a farm field, palatable to the neighbors. So there's really kind of two parts there. One, can we get people to experience the real cost of what owning a car is rather than the subsidized cost that they've been experiencing for the last 50 years? And then can we make good developments palatable to neighborhoods, because good developments reduce trips and they reduce the amount of resources. So I've just given Sabrina 2 minutes to think. Sabrina, why don't you?
Yeah, so what I'm looking for is you have suggested some possible interim measures that are supposed to be helpful in reaching our goal of reducing vehicle miles traveled. And I'm just wondering which of those you think would be most helpful in discouraging the single occupancy vehicle from coming and parking on city streets rather than in them, as you point out, the perhaps more expensive on-site.
So from my perspective, I think there's two of them that would directly address the VMT issue. One would be certain locations where we've got time limit RP3 restrictions. And I think, as was brought up earlier, a lot of game playing of people driving every 2 hours, coming out, moving their car, driving around the block. So they're actually, by using that free on-street parking, increasing mileage above and beyond what they would be if they just parked and paid in, the parking garage or places provided. So I think that's one measure. And, additionally, not having the option at all, or knowing that there's a high likelihood that if they park in a resident parking permit only spot, it's not going to take long for enforcement to identify and cite. So that sort of risk benefit, that people make in deciding, how often they're going to necessarily get caught if they do it, and is it, cheaper to just pay the tickets than pay for parking. I think that eliminates all that sort of game playing and takes that possibility or incentive for folks to drive. If it's, difficult to the extent that they're going to be parking 3 miles away to have a free on-street parking space, at that point, folks typically are going to decide either to shift modes or pay. And typically folks that are avoiding, at great lengths paying for parking are going to go to the, shifting and finding a different way to get to work and how they're traveling each day.
So are you, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And I was saying the second measure, I think looking at how we are more proactive in designating. So when there's a new development going in, looking at, modifying that ordinance to identify those. It wouldn't be eliminating the commuter impact, requirement. It would be, identifying a way to say, we know there's going to be commuter impact, and let's not necessarily wait a year or 2 years for the residents to, one, maybe learn about the program and that there is one that exists, and then organize and get a petition to us and to reach out, more proactively in those neighborhoods to get those restrictions designated before folks spend a couple of years with those impacts in their neighborhoods.
That sounds a bit more long-term, since it would require an ordinance change. Or are you suggesting doing the ordinance change in concert with the TDM ordinance?
So I would think that could be, again, I want to confer with the attorneys, but I would think that would be a relatively straightforward tweak to the ordinance. Again, it's not eliminating or changing our current purpose and goals that the legal standing is under now. It would just be saying, basically adjusting how we identify and determine commuter impacted, rather than necessarily requiring every location to have the study with 50% or more. I think there could be some easy tweaks to do that in a way that still can be supported under our current program and legal standing.
Thank you, Sabrina. Are there more questions of staff before we go back to Tom and the questions that he wants to pose to plan commissioners to comment on? Are there more questions of staff? I don't see any raised hands. So Tom, do you want to go back to those questions that you are hoping to hear comments from plan commissioners?
Yes, that would be great. There we go. So the first one really, as we mentioned, there are individuals in the TPPB and others that are looking at a rather comprehensive look at on-street parking and how it really applies throughout the whole city. Yet right now we're at a point where we could maybe start reducing, development trips right now, or next year, and provide a little consistency. I don't think we can implement, the capital and software costs of a very broad reaching, but we could do some of these interim parking policy measures that would perhaps really help maybe 10 or 15 developments in 2022. And so should the interim parking policy measures be considered with the implementation of the Tdm program?
Commissioners, do you have some thoughts on that? Alder Foster.
Thanks. I think so. I'm one of the folks working on the sort of bigger picture review and have learned a lot already in what we've done there. I'm not opposed to some specific changes, but I'm also a little bit wary about some of them as well. And I think we could end up creating more problems than it's worth if we kind of just try and rush and make some changes. So I mean, in particular, the one that was just being discussed about sort of making it easier to move things into the RP programs. I mean, one of the things that we saw early on when we started digging into specific zones is that it looks like many of the places where we have RP3 restrictions today don't actually have a parking problem per se. But these have sort of sprung up over time, basically because residents don't want other people parking on their street, not because there's not a place for them to park. Perhaps if staff were managing it completely on their own, they would evaluate it differently. But I think there is a risk of those programs just continuing to expand, perhaps unnecessarily. Of all of the things that were suggested, I think moving to the RPO seems like it has a number of benefits, efficiencies on the enforcement side, et cetera. But obviously it carries some downsides as well. How do you meet those short-term needs of visitors, of residents, service vehicles, et cetera? So, I mean, in general, unless there's a really strong demand and a really clear sort of recommendation, I would be hesitant to kind of just throw a couple of parking changes into the mix to help TDM. I would almost be in favor of just moving forward with TDM, continuing to really focus on the more comprehensive policy and implement there. And if we see something after TDM has been implemented that could be fixed short term with some sort of parking change, we could always do that then. But I think my starting point is a little bit of a hesitation towards just picking something.
Thank you, Alder. Commissioner Cantrell.
I would agree. I think we should move forward on the TDM. I think we have a good handle on that at this point in time, and do some additional study of the parking policy measures, because I'm not, at least at this point, very comfortable about the impact of those options. But But I think that, again, we've been thinking about TDM for quite a long time now, and I think we should move forward with that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments on that first one? Eric Sundquist, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Went for a bike ride today and went to a coffee shop and they didn't have bike parking. And for a tenth of a second, I thought, I had to let Matt Tucker know about this. But I don't know what rules they have here about that, but probably not good ones. I would just say on that one, having worn several hats on this project, plan commissioner, interested citizen, semi-consultant, whatnot, I can see so if TDM programs are successful and we see more pay-to-park arrangements or lower park arrangements, I can see pitched battles coming at Plan Commission as those come to be approved if the on-street parking piece isn't buttressed in some way. So I would, I'm not there anymore, but I would hope that you wouldn't move forward with TDM without some kind of fix there. I don't see how these would be a major setback if a policy change comes later. I do agree that any on-street parking fight is fraught, so it would be in some ways maybe easier to move TDM forward without messing with it because it's two political lifts instead of one. But if there can be just the RPO switch or a way to better get project affected areas into an RP3 or RPO without a lengthy process that might allow both the TDM to be more effective and neighbors to have some comfort with the lower park development. I personally think that would be the better outcome.
Thank you, Eric. Seeing no other raised hands, I will comment. I agree with Eric on this one. I think that to help make TDM successful and to help avoid having so many people, neighborhoods come and testify against it, although that's not my main thing, but I would like to try to make TDM successful. And I think that addressing some of the issues with people choosing to simply continue in their single occupancy vehicle and park on the city streets, I would like to attempt to address that to help buttress the success of TDM. Alder Foster.
Thanks. I just wanted to add, I totally agree that it needs to be addressed. And I mean, quite honestly, as part of this parking subcommittee, I mean, I did a deep dive into Legistar and found over 10 years worth of attempts and fits and starts at this. And 100% yes. I think my hesitancy is I honestly don't believe that what was proposed tonight or any combination of those things is actually going to resolve the issues that are going to come up with this. So perhaps it would be something that could be saying, well, along with it, we're making these parking changes, and maybe as like a political tool that would help it sort of go through. But I literally just don't believe that what was proposed is going to make a fundamental difference on the ground for a given project. So that's my hesitancy, not that it's not important. And also, I'm personally just completely committed to actually putting forward something more comprehensive. And I don't think comprehensive has to mean it's going to take 3 years. It could still be phased in. We could still take action. We could continue to really focus on impacts of TDM in that policy. I feel that I'm in it deep enough to not have confidence that those proposed changes are going to make a difference for the success of TDM.
Thank you, Alder. And I would just like to say I am with you on the fact that we really need some comprehensive changes and look in the overall parking thing. So I support your efforts there. I'm just concerned about trying to make TDM more successful. And I also hear questions about whether what we have in the possible works for interim, I don't know whether they would do as much as we would like to see them do.
We did have one developer about a week and a half ago, and they said that if we reduce our parking, they get so much pushback from the neighborhood. And I think you guys, as the planning commission, hear that. So the couple was concerned about that. So we've got some yeses and we've got some nos as an answer to the question one. So, so we'll discuss that. The second question is, are we hitting the right scale? E.g., all developments, should smaller developments be exempt? And so I'm going to go back to one of our slides, and this is an example right here. At one point, we used to have these tables shaded so that basically everything that's, all of the developments that are on the bottom right of the table, they would require annual reporting in one of them, and then everything to the upper left of that line was unshaded, and they might not require annual or biannual reporting. So, Matt Tucker estimates that this would apply to between 100 and 150 developments a year, right? And so, so you think about it, that would require staff time to review. And if you think about maybe a smaller store or, a 10-unit apartment, should we be targeting everything pretty much equally, or should we maybe start with just kind of the larger stuff and then move to the smaller, less impactful stuff? Heather, you might you expressed this question pretty well about a month or two or so ago. Are you here?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm here. I think this is a really important one that we'd love some guidance on. It's sort of thinking about this from the perspective of smaller scale developers and smaller scale development. We want to make sure we are still incentivizing things to happen at the smaller scale, and we don't want a program that's going to end up perhaps continuing to support just the larger scale development that can accommodate additional costs and even staff time. So it's just something that I think we're sensitive to as staff, and at the same time, it might be best for us to start with the larger projects that are more impactful to the overall goal of reducing VMT. But it's something that I think as staff we're really not settled on, and we really need some policy guidance from the commission and the board as we grapple with this. Is it best to do something across the board to basically anything of any size, or is it best to start with the larger and perhaps more impactful developments?
Commissioners, do you have thoughts on this? Alder Heck.
Thank you. I have a question for Heather, I guess. You mentioned staff time, and can you kind of just maybe give a real quick idea about what types of staff time you're talking about? I'm sure you can't give hours or anything, but and does a small project's staff time commitment vary from a large project's staff time commitment with respect to TDM in your estimation? Maybe Tom has something to say about that too. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, I do. I'm actually going to pull something up, but Heather, if you could discuss.
Sure, I can address it. I mean, blissfully, we in planning and zoning may not be involved in this. This probably will end up lying with the traffic engineering division. But I think that, and Matt may want to weigh in here too. I mean, Matt has a lot of experience in the enforcement staff time related to new policy in the zoning code. You know, for instance, the tourist rooming houses piece. I think that there are a lot of unknowns in how much staff time something like this would take. But if it does apply broadly to nearly every project, I think suffice to say it would need additional staff to be supported somehow in order to support the program. You had a really good question woven in there about, you know, do the smaller projects take more staff time than the larger ones? And I can only speak to that from a land use application perspective. And I'll say that it's not as clean of a cut as you might imagine. I think that even some very small scale projects can be quite controversial and involve multiple meetings. So we like to think of things on kind of two axes, like the level of complexity and the level of controversy as two separate axes. And that, you know, when taken together, I think dictates the staff time. I think that the beauty of this program as proposed is that regardless of scale, there would be certainty because you as a property owner developer would be reaching a certain point total and boom, you've met the expectation. There's not a lot of ambiguity about what you would need to do in order to have a successful TDM program. And so that's really one of the essential goals of this is to take out a lot of the guesswork and the sort of discretionary review of, well, which TDM strategies are you picking? And leaving it up for developers and property owners to choose those that work best.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a roving answer, but I'll let Tom take it from here.
Yeah. Can you guys see a spreadsheet right now?
Yes.
Okay. So, as much as I would like this to be in zoning, Matt continues to say that this should not be in zoning. And so, and Matt also says this will take a full-time person. And so what we've looked at is what kind of fee structure would it take to support a person, right? And if we use this fee structure that we're just showing right now, we're just doing different models, it would take about maybe 4 to 5 years for the program to be fully self-supporting of a staff person. And the development would have to pay like the renewal fee that you can see on the spreadsheet every 2 years. And so, you know, so we're exploring this. We don't have it figured out. And so, you know, do we go for a full staff person? Do we do a half staff person and just do the larger developments? Those are just things that we are. I had actually intended to have one slide just to show that, you know, there will be a fee for developers. And there will be staff time. And we can't pretend like it's not, there isn't somewhat of a cost, you know, to this. But, you know, we review traffic impact studies. We do all these other things that really support motor vehicle usage, just kind of just helps balance our attention on some of these other modes too.
Matt, Tucker, did you have anything to add?
I suppose so. As Heather mentioned, we do, in my office, we do manage a number of programs, like short-term rental, permitting, portable signs in the right-of-way, a couple of the recent ones that we've taken on that you might be aware of. And I think we did a okay job of kind of estimating the costs on those. I mean, we're learning short-term rental and it takes a lot of work. But the idea behind the fee was to try and estimate a fee associated with what it would cost to administer the program relative to the service, not necessarily cover an entire staff person. these are the kind of things that we might be able to absorb in the work of today. And then when you're down the road 4 or 5 years, when you have a number of these, that's when you start running into a point of, you have to dedicate a staff person towards managing it. But we did identify that it's to make this program successful, you need to throw some of those resources at that. And maybe the city needs to absorb those to get started, and then adding the staff person that would be good. And I don't want to at all dictate the work of townspeople. I just know what it takes to run programs like this and be successful with them, and it will take human resources.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks. I guess I would just, my inclination is to say it should apply to all developments. But obviously there's a cost associated with that decision. So that's just my thought. Thank you.
Seeing no other raised hands right now, I have to say I agree with Alder Heck. I mean, one of the things that I like about having it apply across the board is, I mean, we want to get kind of an ethic and a awareness of this growing in Madison. So I think by having all sizes of developments, that is more possible. That even the small developers are aware and participating in helping us be a better city in terms of the whole vehicle miles traveled issue. So I agree with Alder Heck, and there are, as with many things, pluses and minuses. Other comments from other commissioners? Commissioner Solheim.
I'm just wondering if there was kind of a threshold you had in mind, if some smaller projects were going to be exempt, what was there a kind of a size in mind where that line would be drawn?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, at one point, all of these tables, we have about 5 of these tables, and half of the cells were shaded, and we thought that and generally the halves that were shaded were, cells that were, in this lower right portion. We decided to take the shading off, because we haven't really decided if we want to treat more impactful projects differently than less impactful. So, I'm going to say for 3 months, we essentially had different categories. And in the last week or so, the shading, was something like, it looked much like this.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's really in the last week or so we decided that that we would take the shading off and ask the question.
And can you describe a little bit more on commercial uses how it works? I've seen in the materials where it talks about like how it applies just to employees and that visitors and patrons are exempt. And I'm trying to balance that with this. I was thinking about small commercial uses. I know, like, when I've worked with some tenants, being shocked at like how many parking spaces a small yoga studio wants to have, and so I'm trying to think of like how that ties into these requirements being more limited to the employees. And I just want to, if you could explain that a little bit more so I'm understanding it correctly, that would help.
You would pick a yoga studio as an example, right?
Yeah.
So if we were to think of other retail uses other than a yoga studio, the employees trip is pretty easy to target, right? It's repeatable. At the same time, they have to develop a life habit, and it's easy for the retail owner to provide those benefits to the habit. Now, customers, it's different, right? Because they're coming, once every 2 weeks or once every 4 weeks. And it's harder to provide incentives. There are ways that you can provide, two bus passes and everything, but I think the thought is that we wanted to, I want to say this, we want, we did not want to burden retail unnecessarily, so that they can go way out to some outlying community and go to some shopping center and they can park for free and they don't have to do this. But down here, they have to. A lot of the retail incentives or may exist already. Downtown you do have to pay for parking, right? So that's my awkward explanation.
No, that makes more sense. Thank you. I appreciate that explanation, and also, that you are cognizant of the retail users and not, impact or like having a bad impact on a retailer downtown compared to another location. So I appreciate that. I think that's all I have. Sorry, it was more questions than comments.
So, Commissioner Solheim, did you have input on the size question then that was posed by Tom?
I guess I'm leaning more towards for every project, because I think that just the consistency and you can make a lot of arguments for where to draw that line. So it seems to make more sense just to apply it across the board to me.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Cantrell.
Well, my question is, since we looked at other cities, is there any guidance in Arlington, Virginia, or Austin, Texas, or some of the cities that we looked at, that did they treat all the developments the same, that they had to recertify every 2 years, or did they, like what you're showing on the screen, exempt some out after the first 2 years, the smaller developments?
We do know that they have to recertify. San Francisco does. I don't know if there was size exemption. Shruvi or Samya, can you answer that?
If I can just answer that, most of the cities which did have reporting requirements was uniform across all the developments. There was some variations in terms of what kind of reporting was required. So some of the smaller developments just had to do some very basic reporting. And that's what we were also considering. The smaller developments would probably be required just to do a self-certification of measures of sorts. And the larger developments would probably have to submit some more details on how they're implementing and whether it's successful based on commute mode share, whether it's really helping to reduce SOB trips.
So some cities had self-certification and just basically saying, we've complied, and I assume in those cases there wouldn't be a fee applied, or for the smaller developments, or I guess.
Most of the cities did have an annual fee. Either way, the fee amount just differed for the two sizes of developments.
So the fee did apply. Okay.
Right. For Austin and Texas, a lot of their measures are actually voluntary. So their program, I would say, is different from what we are proposing.
Okay. Okay. In one respect, and for a 10-unit building, being recertified every 2 years and submitting $100 fee doesn't make a lot of sense to me, or even a 10,000 square foot building. But obviously, the larger the scale of the project, we want to make sure that their requirements stay in place. So I don't know. I guess I'm kind of torn in this respect. I guess what it was shown on the screen, I think that maybe exempts out too many developments, but I think again some of these self-certifications are probably adequate.
So maybe, like for the 10-unit apartment, we might be able to make that more simple. And I will say that SSTI, they've developed a couple of different reporting forms that could be used, and they've looked at that, and we just haven't moved in that direction. I think they developed some draft forms, and in the last month we've been focused more on just what's the base program, and then we have to figure out how do we ensure that we have compliance.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. Do you have further questions?
But I guess just a comment. Obviously, it's easy to apply it to everything. I mean, it's you don't have to think about it; you just apply it. But I guess, is it reasonable? And I guess that's what I'm getting at. And I guess that's the question you're asking: is it reasonable to do that? And I guess at this point, I'm not sure, but it seems somewhat that you can get, for example, you need, if you have a half a parking space for a small 10-unit building, a 10 to 25 unit, you only need 5 points. You get three free points, basically, just being in the program. And you probably could pick up at least a couple more if you're on a bus route or, one of those others. So in that respect, do you need to, give the city, whatever the fee is every 2 years, just to say, hey, I got my 5 points here, and that's my question.
So that's a good question, and I actually I like you use the words, is it reasonable? And we've been developing this program for the last several months, and then we've realized that it will apply to us, the city, and the city-owned properties, and as we develop the city-owned properties. And so I think in the coming weeks, we're going to go through this exercise for the properties that we've either developed or are planning on develop, and see how would we satisfy the requirements and how much would it cost in the city budget to satisfy the requirements. And it's because we want to lead by example, right? And then we also don't want to put burdens or perceived burdens on other people that we don't also accept, right? So
good discussion, good comments. Thank you. Thanks, Commissioner Cantrell and Tom. Alder Foster.
Thanks. It's true that one of the kind of quote unquote free points is the having a Tdm coordinator, or I forget the name that's used. You have to have someone designated to be this person, right? And that's across the board.
Yeah, it is across the board. We are also exploring the that's across the board. However, I think in the last couple of years, the TDM coordinator often can have multiple responsibilities. They might end up being an office manager and the like. And while we do need a point of contact, it's not, we might not have the most robust advocacy within an organization. And so we also have a category we're still developing to have something to be part of a transportation demand management association. And so let's say a multi-use development, they'll have an office manager who's the point person, make sure that this happens and this happens, but they might not have the knowledge or the advocacy that makes a TDM program successful. And so that development would also get points if they were part of a TMA, that would have staff that's kind of trained, aware, and are champions for this. And I don't think we've assigned points for that right now because we don't really have a good TMA. And we're looking at different models for that.
So yeah, maybe that's all related to where I was going with this, but I think I'm also in favor of having an ongoing touch point. I think the question of what the fee should be is kind of separate, and I agree. It doesn't really probably make sense to charge a really small development the same as a really large one, and so maybe the fee itself could be waived for a certain threshold or something. And I also don't think the process should be onerous, but I do think that there's a lot of value in having sort of ongoing touch points, because if not, it basically will essentially disappear. And I would expect that as we continue to grow and technology changes, everything else, TDM measures will grow, et cetera. And so I think maybe even beyond the question of like recertification, the program should be looking to have some ongoing connection and touch points with these coordinators. Maybe we even offer, a couple of times a year, some kind of, continuing education for TDM that if you attend it, there you go. Now you got credit for your annual thing or something along those lines. So I'd be supportive of everybody having to keep TDM within their scope of responsibilities, but also making it something that's not overly onerous.
Thank you, Alder Foster. I don't see any raised hands, so let's go to the next question that you had, Tom.
Yeah, and I'll explain it. Then I'm also going to ask if Matt Tucker can help augment my explanation. But there are instances where we could have very large parcels, right? 50 acres or something to that effect, and they may want to make a 10,000 or 12,000 square foot addition, right? And yet that 12,000 square foot addition, does that, triggers TDM. But does it trigger TDM for the addition? Does it trigger TDM for all 50 acres? You see what I'm saying? And the advantage of triggering TDM for all 50 acres is then all of a sudden we have a 50 acre site that's now doing TDM. But then it could also, lead to disinvestment, well, I'm not going to do 12,000 square foot, investment in this property because it just changes too many things. And Matt, you have a better understanding of this, so could you maybe augment my
Sure. So to carry on with your idea of like maybe only 12,000 or whatever square feet being included, and we did a TDM for just that, creates a accounting problem. How do we know that this property, we only have 12,000 square feet? Because we always have to look at how these things are going to kind of manage through time. And it would be very difficult for us to tackle just some square footage and not all square footage of a property. So our thoughts were the easiest way to account for it is to include the entire property that is owned by the property owner, or the relevant portion of the site, which is kind of how we do these sites today. From a zoning compliance standpoint, we kind of pick off the pieces, if you will. And then further along that is a lot of these large parcels have multiple owners. Even like Westtown's a good example. The Sears ownership holdings that's now called Seritage is one piece, and then there's the CBL property holdings, and then there's a couple of gentlemen that own a piece of property on the backside. They're all cross-connected, and we can't necessarily pin requirements for TDM on properties that are not that can't do anything. I mean, we can't go in because they're building an addition here and make this property over there, then take responsibility for that. So it's kind of an interesting puzzle. And we were, one of the projects we were looking at was we were kind of testing this on was the Village Park. It's a CDA-owned property, you'd think. But I think that Access Community Health owns their parcel. There's a condominium that has the library and the Urban League building in it. And then there's the CDA balance. They own the balance of the property, and it's sort of split up into parcels. It really is a puzzle, kind of trying to figure out the way that TDM should apply to that property. I don't know if we just got to keep thinking, noodling on it, or if anybody has any thoughts on direction on that. Knowing that, our goal is to get more properties in the TDM program so the TDM program can be self-sustaining and successful.
Thoughts or input on that complicated question? Commissioners, any thoughts? Alder Heck.
I'll take a stab, thank you, at this. I don't see how you can unravel multiple property owners unless there's, in either Villager or Westtown, is there nothing that binds those properties together? Are they in an association or some sort of agreement? And if not, I don't see how you could possibly unravel that.
What they have is a cross-access arrangement that lets the ring road connect them to each other. And then they have individual agreements for parking and sometimes shared parking, which is why we pick these off in phases. If you looked at the aerial photography for the mall, you can tell that we fixed pieces like when they built this addition or when they built they made this change. But what it is, I asked the land records guy about this, and there's some really weird thing from the 1970s that kind of ties them all together to make sure that no one builds across the ring, basically.
Like you say, they seem like a perfect candidate for TDM, but I don't know. I can't imagine how you could unravel it. If you can think of a good idea, I think it would be great, but I certainly, you would have a better chance of doing that than I. So just a comment, thanks.
Thanks, Alder. Other thoughts on this? Looks like this is back in your lap, Matt and Tom, and to come up with something.
But you were a lot of help on that. Yeah, maybe I just got a California idea. I was living as a Californian.
Eric, do you have any input?
The weather is really nice here for multimodal transportation. So if you can deal with that in February, I think it would help. But then people do drive a lot here, so I don't know. I can't really square those two. A lot of the ideas that you've just seen actually did come out of California. You saw that map, and it had a bunch of, you saw the San Francisco thing. SSTI worked on a project in Los Angeles, which kind of was the same way. So they do have some good state policy that is pushing local governments in this direction. And some of the local governments are in the state to enable them to do that. So it's sort of a virtuous, not perfect by any means. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of driving here. So don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of interest. And so I said to Soumya and Taruvi, another thing I came across in my job now here in San Diego that looks very similar. So I don't know what to tell you except that for that specific question, except that if this seems like it's bleeding edge for Madison, it's not really for the country. It's maybe leading edge, but not like at the very front. There's still some good things to follow and not just make this all up and feel like you're really out there. I wasn't in on the conversation with the development community, but it sounded like, not wholly hostile. So that's a good thing. So, anyway, I don't know. You asked me to talk. I rambled for a second, and I just wish everybody well on getting this through so that Madison can be part of that front edge that people can then look to copy when they go to, do TDM in Des Moines or wherever the next place is, Milwaukee, whatever it is.
Thank you, Eric. Any other input on this question from commissioners? It seems like you had one more question, Tom, that you wanted to ask.
Yeah, and I think it's more straightforward. How should phased developments be handled? A good example might be, Madison Yards. That's, I think, in 3 phases. Should we look at the whole thing, and or does each individual portion stand on its own? I think they did the parking with the first phase, but the second, how any ideas on how phased development should be done?
Alder Foster.
I'm going to pass on that one, but just give my quick comment on the last one that everybody else punted on. There's a lot I probably don't understand about that, the previous question, but just directionally, I would say I think we should try and go bigger and expect more with additions. And for those where there's this really knotty mess that we can't untangle for whatever reason, consider the ability to have some exemptions for those sorts of scenarios, but start with the concept of having it apply more broadly. That's my directional feedback.
Thanks, Alder. Commissioner Solheim.
In terms of phase developments, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of different ways to think of this. My thought was if, you could look at a project as a whole and then allow the Tdm plan to be amended and updated as each phase is brought forward, very similar to how, people will amend the GDP or SIP and, as buildings change, scope or user, that would allow the developer to kind of, again, like swap points or try different strategies depending on what was the good fit. I also imagine that the plan, the points available would change, I think it was mentioned, maybe even annually that new scoring categories might come in. So it probably merits for the plan to be amended and updated as each phase of the project is brought forward.
Maybe it'd be a 4-year plan instead of a 2-year plan or something.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Commissioner Solheim. Other thoughts on that question? Alder Heck.
Thanks. I tend to agree with what Commissioner Solheim had to say. I'm thinking about Madison Yards, and it doesn't seem like it would be a huge problem to keep building the TDM, based on that first one that was required for whatever block that is. And that doesn't seem, I don't know, maybe staff would find that to be a burden somehow, but it seems like it would be doable.
Thank you, Alder. Commissioner Cantrell.
I like Commissioner Solheim's approach as well, because I think in many of these large-scale developments, we're going to see traffic improvements, which will bring points to a project. And that might be, for the first phase, that may pool points for future phases. So I think that having an overall scope and then amending it as we go over time, I think that's a good approach, because projects change. As we've seen that Madison Yards, they changed an office building to residential or vice versa. So I think that we have to be flexible. But I think looking at the large project all at one time will give us at least the overall scope of what the developer could expect. And if it changes, then we could change the point scores.
Good. Okay. Thank you. So you can tell from this discussion that we're pretty far along, but we have things to do. And then actually, as we were talking with the developers, again, we thought we were pretty far along, but then we realized, oh, well, what about this? You know, because they're practitioners, they're going to have to live with it. They ask very good and pertinent questions. So this kind of shows where we've been, where we're going. You know, about a year ago, we established a purpose, SSDI to literature review. Last fall, they identified strategies and purposes. We've done some focus groups, both with this body and the Transportation Planning Policy Board. Refined measures. We've done some interviews in the last 2 weeks with the development community. We're going to really, I have probably a page or two of questions that we need to answer. You know, how to do this? Should we be doing that? And I also feel like we're going to use a reasonable test. I think we've used some hypothetical projects, but I think we're going to apply it to some city projects. Like, let's say Judge Doyle Square. You know, what would that have required, and how would the city have fulfilled the requirements for Judge Doyle Square? The fleet facility, what would that have required, and how would the city have fulfilled those requirements? Just so that we understand what this looks like, what this feels like, you know, and what would we have to do. We want to lead by example, and then we also want to not just make rules for those guys, but make rules for us, right? And we're part of us. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom and city staff for the information and for the hard work to get us as far as we are. My sense of the Plan Commission members is a high level of support for transportation demand management in general, and with some areas of relative consensus and some that I think as we go forward, there will be some adjustments and further ideas and direction. I want to ask if there are any other comments from Plan Commissioners about anything we've heard about tonight or your thoughts about going forward. I don't see any raised up. There's one, Alder Foster.
Not a Plan Commissioner, but just I think the one that seemed to be sort of a split opinions around the interim parking measures. I'm wondering if it might not be useful to also use some example projects, either some recent ones or anticipated ones, and think about how any of those proposed parking changes would play out in those scenarios, because I think maybe that would help all of us get a better sense of how useful they might be related to TDM.
Very good suggestion. Thank you, Alder. Anything from city staff that you want to comment further on or follow up on? I don't see any raised hands or hear any voices. So the next item is any business by members. Is there any business by members that you would like to bring up? Or announcements? If not, I would be looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner Cantrell. Is there a second? Is there a second on adjournment? Seconded by Alder Heck. We will come to a vote, and if I don't see any raised hands to object, I will assume unanimous consent for adjournment. Thank you for coming tonight, your second meeting this week, although thankfully the first one was kind of short. So thank you.